Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
Amelia bought a luxurious house by the lake, and her husband said, "My parents will live in this house. Your opinion doesn't matter. We've already made the decision." But when they all arrived at the house, they were stunned by what they saw. Amelia Lagos was one of those people whose presence instantly made you feel cozy and calm. She had just turned 29, and the first thing that caught your attention were her expressive green eyes, a gift from her grandmother, as she often said. Her chestnut hair was usually tied up in a messy bun, especially when she was working. Amelia was an interior designer. After graduating with honors from the architecture department, she quickly realized that large-scale urban projects weren't her passion. She loved creating spaces where people felt safe, where every detail mattered and carried a piece of the owner's soul. In her work, Amelia favored natural materials, believing that being surrounded by wood, stone, and cotton brought people closer to nature and their roots. Her projects always stood out for their thoughtfulness, functionality, and a unique atmosphere that clients often couldn't describe in words, but always felt. "This is a place you want to live," they'd say, and to Amelia, that was the highest praise. Amelia collaborated with several design studios but preferred working remotely. She loved silence and the ability to immerse herself fully in a project, without office chaos and distractions. She had a small home studio where the walls were covered in sketches, fabric samples, and photos of inspiring interiors from around the world. In her free time, Amelia chose activities that gave her a break from screens and blueprints. She enjoyed long walks in the park, especially in autumn, when the leaves turned gold and crimson. She was into photography, not the modern digital kind, but old-fashioned film, appreciating the slowness and unpredictability of the process. On weekends, she often visited flea markets, where she found vintage pieces for her projects and personal collection. Amelia was more of an introvert, but that didn't mean she was closed off or unfriendly. She had a few close friends with whom she maintained warm relationships. She loved hosting dinners for them in her cozy apartment, creating a warm, almost family-like atmosphere. With strangers, Amelia could come across as reserved, but those who knew her well appreciated her subtle sense of humor, attention to detail, and ability to listen. Fernando Pena worked as a manager at a large construction company and radiated confidence and ambition. At 32, he had already achieved significant career success and didn't hide his drive for more. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair he always styled neatly, Fernando had a natural charm that helped both in his professional and personal life. He always dressed with style, preferring business attire even in casual settings, quality shirts and trousers, expensive accessories, a well-known brand watch gifted by his parents when he graduated from university. At the office, he was valued for his negotiation skills and ability to handle the most difficult clients. Colleagues praised his analytical mind and quick decision-making under pressure. In his free time, Fernando enjoyed alpine skiing, considering it a perfect way to test his limits while getting an adrenaline rush. In summer, he preferred active recreation, rafting, hiking in the mountains, biking through rough terrain. He liked photographing his adventures and sharing them on social media, where he had a considerable following. At first glance, Fernando seemed open and friendly. He easily struck up conversations on any topic, from the latest political news to trends in art. Yet behind this sociability was a certain guardedness. Few made it into his close inner circle. He had especially close ties with his parents, whose authority he never questioned, although he didn't like to admit it publicly. To acquaintances, Fernando came across as someone who knew exactly what he wanted from life. He always had a plan of career growth, buying property, investments. This confidence attracted people, creating an impression of reliability and stability, but behind his well-laid plans was sometimes an unwillingness to deviate from the path or compromise. Amelia and Fernando met at a corporate party, where they seemed like the most unlikely pair. A quiet, thoughtful girl and a confident, outgoing manager. But it was precisely these differences that drew them to each other. Amelia saw in Fernando the determination and reliability that creative people around her sometimes lacked. Fernando was charmed by her sincerity, naturalness, and the way she stood apart from the women he usually met. Their conversations quickly turned into fascinating exchanges of totally different worldviews. Emilia appreciated the beauty of imperfection, trusted intuition, and believed that not everything in life should be logical. Fernando, on the other hand, loved order, logic, and clear plans. It seemed those opposites would repel each other, but instead they created a growing attraction with every meeting. They also found shared interests. Both loved to travel, though in different ways. Emilia liked immersing herself in local culture and art, while Fernando focused on studying architecture and urban infrastructure. Both appreciated quality films, good food, and long conversations over a glass of wine. And both, despite their differing approaches to life, dreamed of building a real home, not just a place to live, but a space filled with meaning and warmth. Their relationship developed quickly, but never felt rushed. Each day brought new discoveries about each other, and every revelation seemed to only deepen their bond. To outsiders, they looked like a perfect couple, two halves of a whole. They met on one of those September evenings when the city feels especially beautiful, the air still warm but no longer stifling. The chestnut trees were beginning to turn yellow, and the city seemed to slow down before autumn arrived. The corporate party was held in a trendy loft. Emilia had been brought there by her friend Soledad, who worked at an IT company that was celebrating the successful end of a major project. "You need to get out and meet new people," Soledad insisted when Emilia tried to decline the invitation. "You've been buried in sketches for a month and hardly left the house." In the end, Emilia agreed, though she felt out of place among strangers. While Soledad mingled with colleagues, Emilia drifted toward the wall where modern artworks were displayed, and she was studying an abstract painting in shades of blue and gray when a voice spoke beside her. "Looks like a subway map after an earthquake, doesn't it?" Emilia turned and saw a tall man with observant gray eyes and a soft smile. He held 2 glasses of champagne and offered her one. "I noticed you didn't have a drink." "I'm Fernando." "Emilia," she replied with a smile, "and you're right about the painting, though to me it looks more like neural connections in the brain." Their conversation began with a light-hearted discussion of the strange painting but quickly flowed into other topics. Fernando shared that he worked at a construction company called Stroinvest, coordinating residential complex projects. When he learned Emilia was an interior designer, his interest peaked. "We often run into issues with apartment layouts and public spaces. Maybe we should discuss working together sometime." It sounded like a business proposal, but Fernando's gaze suggested something more than just professional interest. They talked the entire evening, forgetting the party, the loud music, the dancing. When the guests began to leave, Fernando offered to walk Emilia home. The night was warm and still. They strolled through the city streets, their conversation continuing as if they were afraid of missing something important. At her doorstep, Emilia realized she didn't want to say goodbye. "Can I take you to dinner?" Fernando asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Tomorrow, or whenever works for you." "Tomorrow would be lovely," Emilia answered, surprised by her own decisiveness. Their first official date took place at a small Italian restaurant in the city center. Fernando arrived with a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, cornflowers, and bellflowers tied with a simple linen ribbon. "I thought roses would be too cliché for you," he said with a smile. Emilia was touched by his attention to detail. The whole evening, they talked about their passions, work, and views on life. Fernando spoke about his love for skiing and the adrenaline he sometimes lacked in everyday life. Emilia shared her thoughts on design and how important it was to create spaces that reflected the personalities of their owners. After dinner, they strolled through the nighttime city for a long while, and the place Emilia had known since childhood suddenly felt new and full of wonder. They watched the stars from a bridge, bought ice cream from a late-night kiosk, and laughed at inside jokes only they found funny. That first date was followed by many others. They went to movies and theaters, spent weekends in parks and museums, and cooked dinner together in Emilia's apartment. Each meeting revealed new sides of one another, and day by day, their bond grew stronger. Fernando won Emilia over with his decisiveness and confidence, his ability to find a solution in any situation. Emilia, in turn, drew Fernando in with her sensitivity, her ability to see beauty in small things, and to create warmth wherever she went. 6 months into the relationship, Fernando proposed to Emilia. It was a warm April evening. They had climbed to a viewing platform overlooking the entire city. The capital lay beneath them, lit by thousands of lights, and the sky above was unusually clear, sprinkled with the first timid stars. Fernando seemed a little nervous all evening, but Emilia chalked it up to a long work week. Suddenly, he took her hand and turned her toward him. "Emilia, I realized I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to make plans, travel, build a home, all of it, with you." He got down on one knee and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, Emilia saw a simple yet elegant ring with a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. "Will you marry me?" Fernando asked, looking at her with such hope and love that it took her breath away. "Yes," she replied simply, extending her hand and allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger. They decided not to have a grand wedding, opting instead for a small ceremony with close friends and family. The wedding took place 3 months after the proposal in a cozy restaurant by the river. The day was sunny and calm, as if nature itself was blessing their union. Emilia met Fernando's parents, Señor Alvaro and Señora Julia, a week before the wedding. They had come from a nearby city, where Alvaro held a high-ranking position at a bank and Julia taught history at a prestigious high school. They were a dignified, somewhat formal couple of the old school. Julia, an elegant woman with perfect posture and a keen eye, immediately began to assess Emilia. "Fernando told us you're a designer. Where did you study?" she asked with a slight air of condescension, as if Emilia's profession wasn't entirely serious. Emilia told her about her education and projects, doing her best to make a good impression. Alvaro barely participated in the conversation, only occasionally nodding and asking brief questions about her family and income. Emilia felt like she was taking an exam and not passing it very well. After the meeting, Fernando reassured her that his parents liked her, they simply weren't used to showing their emotions. Emilia tried to believe him, though she still sensed a certain wariness from his parents. Meeting Fernando's future in-laws was a completely different experience. Emilia's parents, Señor Mariano and Señora Teresa, arrived 2 days before the wedding and immediately surrounded their future son-in-law with warmth and care. Mariano, a sturdy man with kind eyes and a booming laugh, worked as a chief engineer at a construction company and was happy to talk shop with Fernando. Teresa, a literature teacher, eagerly asked him about his favorite books and films. "We're so glad Emilia found such a wonderful young man," she said, giving Fernando a second helping of homemade soup. "It's obvious you're meant for each other." The night before the wedding, the two families met for a shared dinner. Tension hung in the air. It was clear how different they were in character and lifestyle. Julia remained distant, occasionally inserting remarks about the importance of education and culture. Teresa tried to lighten the mood with stories from Emilia's childhood, while Mariano poured homemade wine he had brought with him. Fernando looked a bit embarrassed by his parents' reserve but tried to smooth things over. Emilia watched it all with quiet concern, hoping the families would eventually find common ground. The wedding itself was wonderful. Emilia wore a simple but elegant silk dress that flattered her slim figure. Fernando couldn't take his eyes off her all day, as if he still couldn't believe his luck. They danced to their favorite song, "Can't Help Falling in Love" by Elvis Presley, and in that moment, it felt like nothing could spoil their happiness. After a short honeymoon by the sea, the newlyweds returned to the city and began their life together in Emilia's apartment. A new chapter of their relationship began, not just as lovers, but as husband and wife, building a home and a future together. Emilia's apartment, now their shared nest, was located in a Stalin-era building in the city's southwest. It was a 2-room flat with high ceilings and large windows, on the 4th floor of a brick building with thick walls and a spacious courtyard lined with lindens and maples. The neighborhood was quiet and well-serviced, with schools, clinics, several supermarkets, and cozy cafes nearby. The apartment reflected Emilia's taste and professional eye. The living room walls were painted a warm beige, a handmade Persian rug inherited from her grandmother covered the hardwood floor. The furniture was carefully chosen: a vintage armchair with green velvet upholstery, a Scandinavian-style sofa, and dark wood bookshelves. Paintings by little-known artists Emilia had discovered at exhibitions and galleries hung on the walls. The kitchen was small but cozy, with wooden cabinets painted sky blue and a natural stone countertop. A round table by the window seated no more than 4 people, but it was there that Emilia and Fernando spent most of their evenings, eating dinner, talking, planning their future. The bedroom was decorated in calm, neutral tones: beige, gray, and white. A wide bed with a soft headboard, nightstands, a sliding wardrobe, and a vanity table made up the furnishings. Thick curtains hung on the windows, letting in gentle morning light. One corner of the living room was Emilia's workspace. There stood a desk with a computer, shelves with material samples, and stacks of design and architecture magazines. This little zone of creative chaos contrasted with the apartment's overall orderliness, but it was where her best projects were born. The apartment had been inherited from Emilia's grandmother, Marina Barbero, 5 years ago. Marina was more than just a relative; she was Emilia's close friend and mentor. It was Marina who taught her granddaughter to love art, to respect craftsmanship, and to find beauty in simple things. Marina had worked her whole life at a historical museum and had built an amazing book collection that Emilia now treasured. When her grandmother passed away and left the apartment to her only granddaughter, Emilia couldn't bring herself to renovate it for a long time. It felt sacrilegious to change something filled with so many memories. But eventually, she realized that the best way to honor her grandmother's memory was to create a harmonious, vibrant home. The renovation took nearly a year. Emilia preserved the parquet floors, doors, and some furniture, but completely updated the wiring, plumbing, kitchen, and bathroom. It was in this apartment, now a reflection of her personality, that Emilia brought Fernando after their wedding. He quickly settled into the new space, though his belongings, sports gear, a watch collection, business suits, slightly disrupted the aesthetic Emilia had created. But these were small things, just subtle reminders that now, this home belonged to 2 people. Their domestic life settled surprisingly easily. Fernando turned out to be undemanding when it came to household matters. He didn't insist on a special menu or perfect cleanliness, often cooked himself, especially on weekends, when he liked to experiment with new recipes, and always helped with cleaning. Emilia, for her part, created a cozy atmosphere: fresh flowers on the table, scented candles, homemade bread baked from her grandmother's recipe. They quickly developed their own rituals and traditions. In the mornings, they had breakfast together, discussing their plans for the day. In the evenings, if both were home, they dined by candlelight, even if it was just a simple meal on the table. On Fridays, they had movie nights, watching films on the couch with popcorn and a glass of wine. Saturdays were usually dedicated to active rest. They went out of town, visited museums or exhibitions, met up with friends. Sundays were a day of quiet. They simply enjoyed each other's company, read, talked, and sometimes worked on their own projects. Of course, there were disagreements and minor quarrels. Fernando was a perfectionist in some respects. He liked his shirts perfectly ironed and his documents arranged in strict order. Emilia could forget to wash a cup or leave her sketches on the dining table. They argued about where to go on vacation. Fernando preferred active holidays. Emilia dreamed of quiet towns with museums and architectural landmarks. Sometimes they clashed over spending. Fernando considered some of Emilia's purchases excessive, and she didn't understand his passion for expensive gadgets, but these arguments never escalated into serious conflicts. They knew how to compromise, respected each other's interests, and tried to avoid touching sore spots when tension arose. They talked, explained their feelings and viewpoints, and found solutions that suited them both. The first signs of disharmony began to appear around 6 months into living together. There were small things Emilia tried not to notice. For example, Fernando started staying late at work more often, and when he came home, he might talk on the phone for a long time in another room. When asked who he was speaking with, he answered evasively, "It was work," or "My parents called, we were discussing family stuff." Sometimes he got irritated over trivial things, a misplaced cup or an untimely question, but these outbursts quickly passed. Fernando would apologize, and life returned to normal. Fernando's parents called frequently, almost daily. Julia asked about their life in great detail, what they had for dinner, which shirt Fernando wore to work, when was the last time they saw a doctor. Emilia sensed a kind of hidden control in these questions, but tried not to pay it much attention. After all, it was care for their only son. Several times a month, Fernando visited his parents alone, saying there was no need for Emilia to waste time on such short visits. He usually returned thoughtful, sometimes slightly irritable, but when Emilia asked, he'd say everything was fine, just tired from the road. Emilia's parents visited less often, once every 2 or 3 months, but their visits were always a celebration. Mariano brought homemade wine and delicious cheese from a neighbor's farm. Teresa brought homemade jam and new books for Emilia. They stayed for the weekend, and those days were filled with conversations, laughter, and long walks through the city. Fernando was always polite with his in-laws, but Emilia noticed that he became somewhat reserved in their presence. One day, after her parents left, she asked him, "It seems like you're not very comfortable around my parents. Is something wrong?" Fernando waved it off. "It's fine, they're just very simple people. Very different from my family." In his voice, Emilia caught a note of superiority that she didn't like, but she chose not to dwell on it. After all, Fernando's family was more reserved and formal, while hers was loud and emotional. These differences were natural and shouldn't affect their relationship. Despite these small rough patches, the first year of their marriage was overall happy and harmonious. They made plans for the future, supported each other in their professional endeavors, enjoyed every day spent together. And gradually, one topic started surfacing more and more in their conversations, one that would soon change their lives, the dream of a home of their own. The first talks about a country house began in the middle of winter, when the city was buried in snow and the walk from the metro to their apartment became a real challenge. Fernando came home later than usual, soaked and irritable. "I hate this winter," he grumbled, pulling off his wet boots in the hallway. Traffic jams, slush, dirt everywhere, and those eternal neighbors upstairs with their damn renovations. Emilia silently handed him a warm robe and made hot tea with honey. They sat in the kitchen, listening to the February wind howling outside and the hammering from upstairs. "You know what I dream of?" Fernando suddenly said, looking out at the gray city sky. "A house of our own. Not an apartment, a real house, with a piece of land, and peace and quiet all around." Emilia smiled, imagining a cozy wooden house somewhere at the edge of a forest or by a river. "I think about it too, especially when I'm working on countryside projects for clients. I imagine how amazing it would be to create that kind of space for ourselves." That evening conversation became the start of their shared dream. They began returning more and more to the idea of a country house, discussing what it could be like, where it could be located, how they'd design the land around it. As spring came, city life started to feel even more exhausting. The noise of traffic outside their windows, the polluted air, the constant hustle irritated them more and more. After work, they came home drained, with headaches from the stuffy offices and crowded subways. "You can't really rest in the city," Fernando said, stretching out on the couch after yet another tough day. "Even with the windows open, you hear cars, screaming kids, construction noise around the corner." Emilia nodded, rubbing her temples. "And the smog. Sometimes you wake up, look out the window, and there's this gray haze, and it's hard to breathe." They started spending weekends outside the city more often, renting a cottage in the suburbs, visiting friends' dachas, even just camping in nature. Every time they returned to their city apartment, the gap between how they wanted to live and the reality of the metropolis grew more obvious. Imagine waking up in the morning, stepping out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, and there's silence. Just birds singing and leaves rustling, Emilia said dreamily one warm May evening as they sat on the balcony. "And no neighbors behind the wall," Fernando added. "You can play music as loud as you want, work late without worrying about waking anyone." fresh vegetables from our garden, weekend BBQs for friends, a fireplace for cozy winter nights. Their fantasies became more concrete. Emilia, a professional designer, started sketching ideas for the future house. She imagined a spacious living room with panoramic windows looking out onto a lake or forest, a kitchen with an island in the center, perfect for cooking and chatting with guests, a bedroom with a sunrise view. "Look, I think my studio could go here," she showed Fernando her sketches. A big north-facing window for soft light, lots of shelves for books and materials, a long table for drafting plans. Fernando looked at his wife's drawings with interest and added his own suggestions. "And here on the first floor we could have my office, and definitely a garage with a workshop. I've always wanted a place to tinker with machines." They discussed every detail, from outlet placement to facade materials, from heating systems to landscaping. Emilia put together a folder of magazine clippings, photos of interiors and architectural ideas she liked. Fernando studied the technical side, what building technologies were most efficient, what equipment would be best for an autonomous home. "You know what would be perfect?" Fernando said one day. "A house near water. Not necessarily the sea, maybe a lake or river. You wake up, step onto the terrace, and there's a calm surface reflecting the clouds." Emilia was excited by the idea. Water had always drawn her in, soothing, grounding, giving her a sense of harmony. She started searching online for photos of lakeside homes, reading up on their features, pros and cons. Gradually, their dream of a home by the water took on clearer and clearer form, as if it were becoming real. They were no longer just daydreaming, they were seriously discussing how to make it happen. And one evening, Fernando suggested taking the first concrete step. "Let's make a financial plan," Fernando suggested as they once again discussed their future home. "Let's calculate how much we need and how long it will take us to save that amount." Emilia eagerly supported the idea. They sat down at the kitchen table with a laptop and a notebook, ready to turn their dream into a concrete goal. First, they estimated the approximate cost of the house they envisioned. Considering their preferences, proximity to water, enough space, quality materials, the amount was quite substantial. Not less than €200,000, Fernando concluded, looking at the columns of numbers. And that's without interior finishing or furniture. Emilia whistled. The figure seemed astronomical, but at the same time realistic. A good house in the suburbs couldn't come cheaper. "All right, let's see how much we can set aside each month," she suggested. They laid out their income and expenses, and figured out where they could cut back. It turned out that, with a strict savings plan, they could put away about €500 a month. "That means it'll take us." Fernando did a quick mental calculation, about 25 years to save enough. "That's a bit much, don't you think?" Emilia laughed, though the laughter was a bit nervous. The dream, which had just seemed so close, suddenly moved a quarter of a century away. "Maybe there are other options," she asked. "What if I sell my apartment? It's worth about €115,000 right now. That's already more than half of what we need." Fernando thought for a moment. "That's an option, but where would we live while the house is being built? Renting a place? That's extra costs that would eat into the money from the sale. What about getting a mortgage?" he proposed after a pause. "We have the down payment, and we could save part of the amount in a year or so, and finance the rest." Emilia frowned. She wasn't keen on the idea of a mortgage. "I don't know, Fernando. That's a long-term commitment. And the interest is huge. In the end, we'd end up paying nearly double the real cost of the house. But we get to live in our own home in just a couple of years instead of waiting until retirement," Fernando argued. And so began their first serious disagreements about the future. Emilia thought it would be better to wait, save more money, or find a more affordable option. Fernando insisted on a mortgage, claiming it was the fastest and most practical way to reach their dream. They agreed on a middle ground, opening a special savings account and starting to put money aside. That was something they could both get behind. They decided on a monthly amount and stuck to the plan. To their surprise, the frugal lifestyle wasn't as hard as they feared. They gave up expensive restaurants, rarely ordered food delivery, and planned big purchases more carefully. Instead of shopping, Emilia started reworking her old clothes, and Fernando postponed buying new sports gear. But despite all their efforts, the savings grew more slowly than they hoped. Unexpected expenses kept cropping up. Emilia's laptop broke, and she couldn't work without it. They had to help Fernando's parents with medical bills. A burst pipe in the bathroom required urgent repairs. After 6 months of saving, they had just over €5,000 in the account. A nice sum, but still far from their goal. "See? I told you," Fernando said as they once again checked their balance. "At this rate, we'll never save enough for a house. We need a mortgage." "But it's such a risk," Emilia countered. "What if one of us loses our job or something unexpected happens? We'll be tied to that loan for 15 to 20 years. And what do you suggest? Living in this apartment forever?" Fernando's voice showed irritation. Listening to the neighbors drag furniture upstairs, a screaming kid downstairs, and breathing car fumes instead of fresh air? "Of course not, but maybe we should look into more affordable options. We don't have to build a house from scratch. What about buying a smaller finished home, or a country house we could convert for year-round living?" "I don't want to settle for less," Fernando snapped. "If we're going to change our life, then let's really change it, not move from one box to another, just smaller and further away from civilization." These conversations repeated themselves in slightly different forms, building tension in their relationship. Emilia sensed Fernando becoming more impatient, while she herself grew increasingly anxious about the financial risks. Then, one evening, after a particularly tense conversation about money, Fernando said something that cut deep. "It's easy for you to talk about saving and risks. You have your own apartment. I have nothing. I'm basically just a guest living in your place." Emilia was stunned. "You're not living in my place. You're living with me. This is our home. I've never made you feel like it's just mine." Fernando immediately regretted his words. He walked over, hugged her, and muttered apologetically, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just tired and lost my temper. Of course, this is our home." They made peace, but the sting of that conversation lingered. For the first time, Emilia began to wonder whether Fernando had always felt uncomfortable in the apartment she inherited. Maybe that was why he was so eager to have a home of their own, a place that would belong equally to both of them. The thought haunted her. She tried to make him feel more at home, rearranged the furniture to his taste, gave him his own storage space for his sports equipment, even repainted the living room walls a darker, more masculine color. But now, it seemed none of it had truly worked. Fernando still felt like a guest, not a homeowner. Meanwhile, their savings continued to grow, slowly. Fernando still brought up the mortgage idea now and then, though less insistently. Emilia found a compromise. She proposed they keep saving for another year and then make a final decision about how to finance their dream. Deep down, she hoped that something would change in that time. Maybe their incomes would increase, or they'd find a more affordable house, or perhaps even reconsider their plans entirely. But, as life often does, it had a surprise in store. Spring turned into summer, and then came the golden autumn. Emilia and Fernando kept saving for their dream home, though the topic was no longer discussed with the same excitement. It was as if they had silently agreed to take a break from financial planning and future arguments. In mid-September, Emilia's parents called and invited them to come visit for the weekend. "We want to show you how we fixed up the dacha," Teresa said. "Mariano built a new gazebo, and I planted a rose garden. And the weather is just perfect, Indian summer in full swing." Emilia happily agreed. She and Fernando hadn't left the city in a while, and a trip to her parents' country house sounded like a perfect chance to escape the urban noise. The dacha was 100 kilometers from the capital, in a small village on a riverbank. It wasn't a luxury estate, just a simple wooden house on 600 square meters of land, but for Emilia, it had always been a symbol of peace and family warmth. Her childhood was rooted there, learning to swim in the river, picking mushrooms in the nearby forest, identifying constellations in the dark, unpolluted sky. They arrived on Saturday morning. Mariano met them at the gate, giving his daughter and son-in-law a warm hug. Finally, we thought you had completely forgotten the way to your parents' house. Teresa ran out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Emilia, Fernando, I'm so happy to see you. She kissed her daughter and son-in-law, then led them inside, where breakfast was already laid out on the table: homemade pancakes, currant and raspberry jam, fresh cottage cheese, and honey from the neighbor's apiary. After breakfast, they walked around the property. Mariano proudly showed off the new gazebo he had built with his own hands, spacious, with carved details and comfortable benches. Teresa gave them a tour of her rose garden. The roses had already bloomed, but she enthusiastically described the varieties she had planted and how beautifully they blossomed in the summer. The day was warm and sunny. They had lunch in the gazebo and later walked to the river just to sit by the shore, listen to the rustling reeds, and watch the drifting clouds. Emilia noticed how relaxed Fernando seemed. He wasn't used to such simple, heartfelt relaxation. Their usual circle preferred active leisure, trendy restaurants, loud parties, and extreme sports. In the evening, Mariano lit the grill, and they made lamb kebabs marinated with a special recipe. They stayed up late, talking about everything under the sun, listening to old vinyl records on the player, and drinking homemade wine. When it got dark, Mariano turned on the string lights hanging around the gazebo, creating a cozy, almost magical atmosphere. It's so nice here, Fernando sighed, looking around the warmly lit garden. Wish we had a place like this. What's stopping you? Mariano asked, pouring him another glass of wine. We could even help you find a plot next door, if you want. This is a beautiful area. Emilia shook her head. It's a bit too far from the city for daily commutes. We were thinking of something closer, within 50 kilometers. But the prices are very different there, Teresa noted. The conversation naturally shifted to the topic of their future countryside home. Emilia and Fernando shared their dream, their attempts to save for it, and their slow progress. So what's the issue? Mariano asked when they finished. Sell Emilia's apartment, that'll cover most of it. We thought about that, Fernando replied, but it doesn't solve everything. And where would we live while the house is being built? Emilia's parents exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Mariano cleared his throat and said, Actually, your mother and I have been meaning to offer you something. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then continued. We have some savings. We put it aside for you, Emilia. We thought we'd use it for retirement travel, but honestly, we don't really need to go anywhere now. And this is a worthy cause. A house. So, we're ready to add to the money from the apartment sale. I think it'll be enough for a good home. Emilia stared at her father in astonishment. Dad, are you serious? That's a lot of money. Not so much that we can't help our only daughter, Teresa answered gently. We've been thinking about it for a while, just waiting for the right moment. But what about your travel dreams? Our vacation? Emilia felt a lump rise in her throat. Once you have your house, we'll come visit you, Mariano laughed. That'll be the best vacation, with our daughter, our son-in-law, and maybe, God willing, grandchildren. Fernando looked as shocked as Emilia. He clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. This is an incredibly generous offer, he finally said. I don't even know what to say. Just say thank you and we accept, Mariano winked. And let's drink to your future home. They raised their glasses, and Emilia felt overwhelmed with happiness, not just from the prospect of achieving their dream, but from the realization of how deeply her parents loved and supported her. Later that night, when Emilia and Fernando lay in bed in the small guest room, he whispered, I can't believe this is actually happening. Your parents, they're amazing people. Yeah, Emilia replied softly, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. I always knew I could count on them, but this is more than I ever expected. We have to live up to their trust, Fernando said seriously, and build a home that will become a gathering place for the whole family. They fell asleep thinking about the future, which now felt so close and tangible. The dream of a house by the water was no longer just a fantasy. It was becoming a concrete plan they could start acting on right away. The next morning over breakfast, they discussed the details. Mariano, who had construction experience, gave practical advice: what to pay attention to when choosing land, which materials were preferable, how to avoid issues with contractors. The most important thing is not to rush, he said. Look at least a dozen options before deciding, and always check the paperwork thoroughly. There's no such thing as small details in this business. They left the countryside with light hearts and a firm determination to begin their search for the perfect home as soon as possible. Emilia's parents promised to transfer the money as soon as the right plot was found and the paperwork began. In the car on the way back to the city, Emilia and Fernando could talk about nothing but their future home. Now that the financial part is almost settled, we can focus on finding the ideal spot, Fernando said, keeping his eyes on the road. Where should we start? I think first we need to list my apartment for sale, Emilia replied. We'll see how quickly it sells and exactly how much we'll get for it. And in the meantime, we can start checking out listings for countryside homes. Fernando nodded in agreement. Good idea. I'll look into finding a realtor for the sale. I know someone at a real estate agency. I think he can help. Emilia felt a twinge of anxiety. Just don't rush it, okay? This is the apartment I grew up in. It's full of memories. I want to make sure we're selling it to the right people and at a fair price. Of course, Fernando said, squeezing her hand. We'll do it your way. The following weeks were filled with busy preparations. Emilia began getting the apartment ready for sale, deep cleaning, removing personal items to make the space look more neutral, doing minor repairs where needed. Every corner of the apartment held a memory. The dent on the windowsill from when she dropped a heavy dictionary while studying. A faint pencil mark on the hallway wall where her grandmother used to track her height each year. While peeling off old wallpaper in the bedroom, Emilia found a small drawing she had made at age 7, a bright sun and a little house with smoke curling from the chimney. She smiled wistfully, realizing the irony. She'd been dreaming of a house her whole life. Fernando did reach out to his realtor friend, Raul, who valued the apartment higher than they had expected. A place in this neighborhood with a good renovation is hot property, he assured them. I think we'll find a buyer within a month. The viewings had begun. Emilia felt anxious every time strangers came into her home, inspecting the rooms, peeking into closets, discussing what they would tear down or remodel. Fernando usually handled the conversations with potential buyers, while Emilia preferred to be away. She'd go for a walk or sit in a nearby cafe. How did it go? She would ask upon returning home. Fine, Fernando would reply. They liked the apartment, but they're unsure about the price. This happened several times until a young couple with a small child came in and immediately said they'd fallen in love with the place. This is exactly what we've been looking for, said the young woman, holding their 1-year-old in her arms. Quiet neighborhood, good school nearby, and a park just 5 minutes away. They agreed to the asking price with hardly any negotiation, a rare occurrence in real estate. Emilia felt a wave of relief. The apartment was going to people who would value it as much as she had. The following weeks were filled with legal formalities, gathering documents, signing the contract, arranging the transfer of funds. Mariano, true to his word, took an active part in the process, checking every document, consulting a lawyer, and ensuring that every condition was properly fulfilled. On the day the final paperwork was signed and the keys handed over, Emilia walked through the now empty apartment, silently saying goodbye to each room. This was where she had spent her childhood, her teenage years, the beginning of her adult life. Her grandmother had lived here, telling magical stories and teaching her to see beauty in simple things. This was the place she brought Fernando after their wedding, where they spent the happy first year of their marriage. Feeling sad? Fernando asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. A little, Emilia admitted. But it's the right decision. You can't move forward if you're always looking back. She gave the empty rooms one last look, as if imprinting them in her memory, then firmly closed the door behind her. After the sale, Emilia and Fernando temporarily moved into the apartment of Emilia's friend Soledad, who had gone on a 6-month work assignment and happily offered her place to them. "Just water my plants and no weekday parties," she joked before leaving. Now, with the funds from the apartment sale and knowing the size of Emilia's parents' contribution, they could finally begin the focused search for their dream home. Fernando contacted several real estate agencies specializing in countryside properties, and every weekend they went to see the options presented. The first was a cottage village 30 kilometers from the city. Neat but identical houses standing close together, small plots fenced off with identical barriers. Like an anthill, Emilia grimaced, looking over the rows of look-alike homes. No individuality, no space. The next was an old house in a village, spacious, with a large garden, but in need of major repairs. "We have to redo everything," said Fernando, inspecting the rotting floors and sagging roof. "This isn't a renovation, it's a full rebuild. It'll cost more than building a new house." They checked out houses in various directions from the city. Some were too far, others too close to noisy roads. Some had poor construction quality, others had bad layouts or tiny plots of land. After every trip, they would discuss what they'd seen, make a list of pros and cons, and compare. Slowly, their priorities became clearer. The house had to be a standalone, not part of a village complex, with a good-sized plot, not too far from the city for commuting, in solid condition without needing major repairs, and ideally, near water, a lake or river. "I feel like we're searching for a unicorn," Emilia sighed after yet another disappointing visit. "The perfect house that meets all our criteria and still fits our budget." "We just have to keep looking," Fernando encouraged her. "Sooner or later, we'll find the one." And then, just as they began to question whether their expectations were realistic, their realtor called with an offer that sounded too good to be true. "There's a new listing," said Joaquin, their realtor, over the phone. "Just came up. A house on a lake, 40 kilometers from the capital. The owners are selling urgently, they're moving abroad. It's not new, but in excellent condition. The lot is large, 1,500 square meters, and it borders directly on the lake. The price is a bit above your budget, but considering the urgency, I think they'll negotiate." Emilia and Fernando exchanged a look of cautious hope. "When can we see it?" asked Fernando. "Even today," Joaquin replied. "The owners have already moved most of their stuff out. The house is practically empty." A few hours later, they were driving down a country road, turning off the highway toward the forest. Emilia stared out the window at passing fields and groves, at the sky covered in a light haze, and thought how their long search might soon be over. "I can't believe we might actually find a lakeside house within our budget," she said, turning to Fernando. "These places are usually way more expensive." "Let's just hope it's not a complete wreck that needs $1 million in repairs," he replied, eyes on the road. They turned onto a narrow forest path, drove a few hundred meters more, and suddenly the trees opened up, revealing a small lake surrounded by sparse birch and pine. On the shore, just a few dozen meters from the water, stood a 2-story house made of light wood, with a large terrace facing the lake. "Oh my God," Emilia whispered, unable to believe her eyes. This is what we've been dreaming of," Fernando finished, bringing the car to a stop. They got out and stood in silence, breathing in the fresh forest air, gazing at the scene before them. The lake wasn't large, but it was stunning, with clear water reflecting the blue sky and the trees. The only sounds were birdsong and the soft rustling of leaves. "Well, what do you think?" Joaquin asked, walking up to them. "It's amazing," Emilia replied, eyes still fixed on the water. "But what's the catch? Why such a quick sale?" "The owners, a couple, got job offers in Canada," the realtor explained. "They're moving in a month. No tricks, they just need the money fast." They began touring the house. It had been built 15 years ago, but the previous owners had taken good care of it. Inside were 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, a dining room, and even an office with a lake view. Outside, there was a small sauna and a garage for 2 cars. Emilia walked through the rooms, imagining their life here. This bedroom could have the bed positioned so they'd wake up to the lake view. A large couch by the fireplace in the living room for cozy winter evenings. The kitchen was big enough for a central island, something she'd always dreamed of. Fernando, meanwhile, asked practical questions about the foundation, the roof, the heating system. Joaquin patiently answered everything, showing them documents, building permits, and technical specs. How much? Fernando finally asked once the tour was over. The price was high, but within their budget, especially with the help from Emilia's parents. They exchanged a glance, silently reading each other's thoughts. This was exactly what they'd been searching for. "We'll take it," said Fernando. "We can make a down payment right now." Emilia squeezed his hand, her heart pounding with excitement and happiness. Was this really happening? Had they truly found their dream home? The next day, Emilia called her parents to share the happy news. "We found a house," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "It's perfect, Dad, right on the lake, 40 kilometers from the capital. A 2-story wooden house, with a large terrace and direct access to the water." "I'm happy for you, sweetheart," Mariano replied. "And the paperwork? Everything in order?" "Yes," Joaquin showed us all the documents. "Everything is properly registered, with all the necessary permits and approvals. We've already made the down payment." "Don't rush into the final decision," her father advised. "I'll come this weekend, and we'll take a look together. I want to see for myself what we're spending that kind of money on." Emilia smiled. Her father had always been practical and cautious. She knew his experience in construction and legal matters would be invaluable for such a serious purchase. Over the weekend, Mariano came to the capital and went with Emilia and Fernando to see the house. He inspected every corner attentively, checked the foundation, walls, roof, and utilities, asked plenty of questions, made notes, and took pictures of certain details for later analysis. "So, Dad, what do you think?" Emilia asked impatiently once the inspection was done. "Overall, it's a good house," Mariano nodded. "Built well, quality materials. A few minor issues, but nothing critical. The price is a bit steep, but considering the location on the lake." "So you approve?" Fernando asked with a hopeful smile. "I do," said Mariano. "But let's still run everything by a lawyer. I want to make sure all the documents are thoroughly checked." The following week was filled with paperwork. The lawyer, a friend of Mariano's, carefully reviewed all the documents, prepared the purchase agreement, and advised them on the property registration process. Emilia regularly spoke with her father, consulting on every point of the contract. Fernando sometimes showed signs of impatience, feeling they were dragging things out. "Why so many checks?" he would say. "Joaquin's a decent guy, he's not going to scam us." "It's not about Joaquin," Emilia explained. "We just need to make sure everything's in perfect order. It's too much money to take any risks." At times, she felt Fernando was irritated by her father's constant involvement in the buying process, but he never said so directly, and she decided she was probably imagining it. Finally, the paperwork was done, the money was transferred, and the house officially became theirs. The moment the realtor ceremoniously handed them the keys was one Emilia would never forget, the weight of the metal in her palm, the feeling that these weren't just keys to a house, but to a whole new life. "Our house," she whispered, hugging Fernando. "We have our own home by the lake." That evening, they had a small celebration. They brought champagne and sandwiches, sat out on the terrace, and watched the sunset over the lake. The water glowed pink and gold, and somewhere in the distance, birds called out as they returned to their nests. "Can you believe we get to see this every day now?" Emilia said, watching the clouds reflect on the water. "And wake up to birdsong instead of traffic," Fernando added, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. In that moment, it felt like everything was perfect, their dream had finally come true, and only happiness and harmony lay ahead. They had no idea that fate had a serious challenge in store for them, one that would change their lives. The next few weeks were filled with pleasant tasks as they prepared for the move. Though they still lived in Soledad's apartment, they spent nearly all their free time at the new house, doing minor repairs, painting walls, replacing plumbing, buying furniture and decor. Emilia enthusiastically took charge of designing each room. She mixed styles, creating cozy, functional spaces with personality. For the living room, she chose warm, earthy tones to emphasize the natural wood and create a sense of connection with nature. In the bedroom, she opted for calm, neutral colors, gray, white, beige, for a relaxing, restful atmosphere. She paid special attention to her future studio, a room on the second floor with a large window overlooking the lake. This was where she planned to work on her projects, drawing inspiration from the surrounding nature. They painted the walls a soft bluish gray, added a large desk, a comfortable chair, and shelves for books and materials. Fernando also took an active role in setting up the house. He threw himself into organizing the garage and workshop, setting up a workbench, hanging tools, and creating a storage system for sporting equipment. In his spare time, he studied the property layout, planned where to place gardening tools, where to set up a barbecue area, and where to build a dock for the boat. On weekends, friends would come to help with repairs, sharing ideas and lending a hand. After working, they'd have impromptu picnics by the lake, grilling, drinking wine, watching the stars. In those moments, Emilia felt completely happy, surrounded by loved ones in a beautiful place, with plans for the future that were finally coming to life. Emilia's parents also came to help. Mariano took charge of checking and repairing the wiring, installing extra outlets, and adjusting the heating system. Teresa brought flower and shrub seedlings for the garden, helped Emilia choose home textiles, and shared tips on household management. "I think you'll be very happy here," she said to her daughter as they relaxed on the terrace after gardening. "This is exactly the kind of place that suits you and Fernando." Emilia hugged her mother, filled with gratitude for her support and understanding. Fernando's parents didn't visit. They were still on their annual tour of Europe. Julia called nearly every day, asking about the house, the move, their future plans. Sometimes, Emilia detected a hint of criticism or doubt in her questions, but she tried not to let it bother her. At last, the house was ready to move into. All major renovations were done, the furniture was in place, belongings packed and ready for transport. They scheduled the move for the upcoming Saturday, rented a moving truck, and invited friends to help with loading and unloading. The night before the move, Emilia couldn't sleep from the excitement. She lay in the dark, imagining how the next morning they would wake up in their own home, have breakfast on the terrace, looking out over the lake, how their new, better life would begin. "Are you awake?" Fernando asked softly, turning toward her. "I can't sleep, I'm too excited," Emilia admitted. "It all feels so unreal. Can you believe that tomorrow we'll finally be living in our house by the lake?" "Tomorrow our new life begins," he said, hugging her. "And it's going to be beautiful, I promise." Emilia smiled in the darkness, her heart overflowing with love and hope. Saturday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and warm for early autumn. Emilia woke up early, even before the alarm, with a sense of celebration in her soul. Today was a special day, the day their dream would finally come true. Fernando was in a great mood too. He hummed to himself while making breakfast, cracked jokes, and shared plans for the coming days. "As soon as we unpack, I'll start working on the dock," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I want to finish it before the cold hits, so we can launch the boat in the spring." By 9 in the morning, their friends had arrived to help with the loading. Soledad, the apartment's owner, had also come back from her trip a few days early to see them off. "I'll miss you guys," she said, hugging Emilia, "but I forgive you for leaving, since you found your dream home." It took almost 2 hours to load everything into the rented truck. When all was ready, Emilia did one last walkthrough of the apartment, checking that nothing was left behind. "Everything's here," she said, returning to the waiting group. "Let's go." The trip to the house took just over an hour. They drove first along the Novorossiysk highway, then turned onto a country road that wound through the forest to the lake. Emilia sat in the passenger seat next to Fernando, who was driving the truck, and watched the golden and crimson trees flash by outside the window. Autumn had fully arrived, painting the leaves in vivid colors. As soon as we arrive, the first thing we'll do is drink champagne on the terrace, Emilia said, imagining them sitting with glasses in hand, admiring the lake, now as the rightful owners of this little slice of paradise. Great idea, Fernando nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. When they finally turned onto the narrow path leading to their house, Emilia's heart began to race. Just a few more minutes, and the trees parted, revealing the lake and the house on the shore, their house. "We're home," Emilia exclaimed as soon as the truck came to a stop. She jumped out of the cab and ran toward the house like a child receiving a long-awaited gift. Fernando and their friends, who had followed in their own cars, trailed behind her, smiling at her genuine joy. Unloading and arranging the furniture took up the rest of the day. Their friends helped carry heavy items, assemble beds and wardrobes, and unpack boxes of dishes and books. By evening, most of the work was done, and the house already felt lived in, as if they had been there for years. As planned, they opened the champagne at the end of the day and stepped onto the terrace. The golden sunset painted the sky and the lake in warm tones, a gentle breeze rustled through the treetops, and somewhere in the distance, birds cried out. "To our new home." Fernando raised his glass. "To our new life." "To us," Emilia added, clinking glasses with him and their friends. Their friends left around 9 in the evening, leaving Emilia and Fernando alone in their new home. They had dinner on the terrace, gazing at the stars, which appeared especially bright and close in the absence of city lights. "I'm so happy," Emilia said, looking up at the starry sky. "This is exactly what we dreamed of." Emilia began clearing the dishes in the kitchen, mentally organizing her plans for the next day. She needed to hang curtains in the bedroom, unpack the last boxes of books, and meet the neighbors. Fernando entered the kitchen with their empty glasses and said in a completely casual tone, "By the way, I forgot to tell you. My parents are going to live in this house. It's already decided." Emilia froze, a plate in her hands. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. "What did you say?" Fernando set the glasses down and looked at her with a strange expression, a mix of defiance and unwavering certainty. "My parents are going to live in this house. Your opinion doesn't matter. We've already decided." Emilia felt the plate slip from her suddenly weakened fingers. She barely managed to set it on the counter. You're joking?" Her voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "No, Emilia, I'm completely serious. My parents sold their apartment and will be here in 3 days. We already agreed that they'll take the rooms on the ground floor." His words hit Emilia like a punch. Her heart skipped a beat, then pounded twice as fast. A cold wave rushed up her arms from her fingertips. "When did you decide this? Why didn't you talk to me about it?" Fernando shrugged as if it were a trivial matter. "I didn't think it was such a big deal. The house is big, there's enough space for everyone." Emilia felt a wave of anger and betrayal rising inside her. "Fernando, this is our house. We chose it together, we dreamed about this life together. My parents helped us with the money. How could you make such a decision behind my back? My parents need help. They need somewhere to live," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I'm their son, and I have to take care of them. But why here? And why am I only finding out about this now?" Fernando crossed his arms over his chest, and for the first time, Emilia saw something cold and unfamiliar in his eyes. "Because I knew how you'd react. You'd make a scene, like you're doing now. But it's already done. They sold their apartment and invested the money into my brother's business. There's no turning back." Emilia realized this wasn't a spontaneous decision. He had planned it long ago, even before they moved. "You knew this when we were choosing the house? When we were signing the papers?" "Yes, I knew." "So what?" Fernando replied defiantly. I did what I had to do for my parents. Their argument escalated into their first serious fight. They stood in the kitchen of the house they had dreamed of, yelling at each other like strangers. Every compromise Emilia tried to suggest, temporary arrangements, building a guest house, was met with a brick wall of rejection. You know what? Fernando finally said, looking at her with cold contempt. I'm not discussing this anymore. In 3 days, my parents are moving in, and you'll greet them with a smile. If not, we'll talk about dividing the property. Half the house is mine anyway. Are you threatening me? Emilia asked quietly. I'm just telling you how it's going to be, he replied, walking out. I'm going to get my parents. They're at my brother's place. And when I come back, you'd better behave or you'll regret it. The front door slammed, the engine started, and the sound of the car gradually faded into the distance. Emilia was left alone in the vast, empty house that just an hour ago had seemed like paradise and now felt like a battlefield. After calling her father, who arrived with a friend who was a police officer, Emilia quickly transferred ownership of the house to her father. By the time Fernando returned with his parents, she was ready for confrontation. Seeing Emilia's father and the police officer, Fernando was caught off guard. What's going on here? I'm filing for divorce, Emilia said firmly. This house isn't yours anymore, it belongs to my father. Fernando's attempts to manipulate her with lines like "we're a family" or to threaten legal action crashed against her determination. He was forced to leave empty-handed. The divorce was swift. In court, it was confirmed that the house had been transferred to Emilia's father, and Fernando could not claim it as marital property. His shock at realizing he had lost everything was obvious to everyone present. A year passed. Emilia sat on the terrace of her lakeside home, watching the sunset. A cup of tea rested beside her, and an album with sketches for a new project lay open in her lap. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, painful, but necessary. After the divorce, she not only kept the house but found herself. Her design studio was thriving. New friends among the neighbors brought joy to her life, and her parents often came to visit. Looking at the golden shimmer of the lake, Emilia thought about how sometimes the most painful losses become the beginning of something far more valuable, a life where you set the rules, creating a space filled with harmony and genuine happiness. In this house by the lake, Emilia had finally found what she had always been searching for, not just a place to live, but a true sense of home, where every corner reflected her soul, and where she was truly free.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.